In this tutorial, I'm going to show you the basics of Autodesk Maya 2013. By the end of this tutorial, you should be able to create a simple robot character like I have shown here, with some basic texture and simple lighting. Maya is a very powerful and very complicated program and can be overwhelming, so it's important to know that you have many resources available. Whenever you first open Maya, you will see this Essential Skills Movies window. These go into a lot of detail about all of the basic skills you need to master Maya, so don't be afraid to explore these videos. You can also go to Help, Maya Help, in order to access the user manual for Maya should you ever feel stuck. So let's get started. You begin with a big empty 3D space and some very complicated user menus up here. With this pull-down screen in the corner, you have the ability to change the options you have in the menu in order to coordinate with what you're doing. For the sake of this tutorial, we're going to be dealing primarily with the Polygons menu. So go ahead and set it there now. As you can see, some of your options up here changed in order to coordinate with building polygons. Let's get familiar with the workspace. In order to move around the space, you must use the Alt key and a 3-button mouse. While pressing Alt, you can rotate around the space with the left mouse button. You can pan around the space using the middle mouse button. And you can zoom in and out of the space using the right mouse button. You can also zoom in and out by scrolling the middle mouse button, but using Alt and the right mouse button tends to be a little more accurate and smoother. You'll notice that you have a grid right here and a compass up here in the corner to give you reference. You can always click on the different sections of this compass in order to change your camera angle. Let's start building. Go ahead and click on this Polygons tab. You'll notice you have several different shapes to choose from. Let's start with a cube. Drag along the grid in order to set the width, and then drag up to set the height. If you want to create a perfect cube, you can press Shift while you're dragging. Now that we have an object in the space, let's look at what we can do with it. You'll notice that this channel box now has some numbers in it. These correspond with the dimensions and the position of your object. If you click off of the object, you'll notice that all of those details go away. If you click back on the object, they reappear. You can always change these details. For example, let's have our cube appear in the middle of the grid. So we'll set X, Y, and Z all to 0. And now our cube is right in the middle. If you're not happy with the dimensions that you set when you first created the object, you can always double-click on this Polycube 1 under Inputs, and this gives you the ability to change the width, height, and depth. Let's go ahead and set all of these even to 10. These units correspond with the units in your reference grid. So 10 of these little squares on your grid will make up the length, width, and height of your cube. You can also change a lot of these details and a lot more in your attribute editor. If you don't see it here on the side, you can go to Window and Attribute Editor, and then it will appear. Each of these tabs allows you to change different parameters on your object. We're having a little trouble seeing our cube here because it's just in wireframe mode right now. If you want to see the whole cube, press the number 5 on your keypad. That'll fill it in. You can switch back and forth between this and wireframe mode by using the keypad numbers 4 and 5. If you press 6, you'll be able to see the textures of your object. We don't have any textures yet, so it looks the same as it does in 5. We'll get more into that later. Go ahead and press 5 so that you're not in wireframe mode or in texture mode. The 3 key components to editing with polys are Translate, Rotate, and Scale. Over here on the left-hand side you have your toolbar. You'll notice that you're currently using the Select tool. While you have your object selected, click on the Translate tool. This will show the translate controls. You can click on each of the arrows to translate your object in that direction. You can also click on this middle square to move the object in every direction at once. However, be careful with this. Since you're working in 3D space, it's hard to tell where your object is going to end up until you change camera directions. Click on the Rotate tool just underneath it to pull up the Rotate controls. The same idea applies. You can rotate your object in one direction at a time, or in every direction at once. Right underneath that is the Scale tool, and you'll see it's the same idea once again. You can change the parameters directionally or altogether. If you're ever unhappy with the changes that you made, you can always press Command Z for undo. The shortcuts for these controls are W for translate, E for rotate, and R for scale. You can press Q to switch back to your select tool. If you just remember Q, W, E, and R on the keyboard, you can switch back and forth between all of these tools in order to edit your polygons much more efficiently. Let's not forget that since Maya software is so powerful, it's subject to crashing. Make sure you press Command S to save often. When the Save As menu comes up, I recommend saving your file as a Maya ASCII file. I'm just saving mine to the desktop for now. I'm just going to start using what we now know in order to build a very simple robot. You can use these different shapes in order to build your robot's skeleton. I'm just going to press delete and delete this cube so I can start over. I'm going to start by making my robot's leg. Now, if you go to create an object, Maya's going to automatically build it onto the grid for you. But let's say you want to build onto the shapes that you have. If you have the object selected, you can go to Modify, Make Live. And now the object that you create is going to be created on the live object. If you're through building onto that object, go to Modify, Make Not Live. Now, I created this cylinder to act as my robot's shin, but this cylinder has a whole lot of subdivisions that I don't think are necessary. So in order to save space, I'm going to go to the channel box and click on Polycylinder 1 and change the subdivision axis to 10 instead of 20. This makes the cylinder a lot more polygonal, but since I'm building a robot, it's suitable. I can even go down to 8 or 7. I think I'll go down to 6. As you can see, changing the subdivision will give you a very different shape, which you can use to your advantage. Now I'm going to make this cylinder live and put a sphere right here to act as my robot's knee. But again, I have a whole lot of subdivisions going on here that are just not necessary for such a small detail. Now, I've got my robot's shin built, but I happen to think that its foot is going to be way too big for its leg. I want to scale it down, but when I go to do so, it'll only scale one of the objects at a time. If I select both of them, it'll scale both of them, but they won't be connected. So what I want to do now is combine these objects to act as one. So I'm going to select both of these objects, click on Mesh, and click Combine. Now these two objects are combined. You'll notice, however, that when Maya combines the objects, it assumes the center of the object is the center of the grid. So it's going to scale in proportion to the center of the grid. This is not helpful for my case, so what I'm going to do, having the object selected, click on Modify, Center Pivot. And now, I can scale it as if it's one object. To continue building this leg, I'm going to select this shin right here and click Command D to duplicate the object. I'm going to press W and then move it up here. I think these are both way too big, so I'm going to scale them both down. So now I have one leg, but of course my robot's going to have at least two. Otherwise balance would be pretty difficult. So what I'm going to do is click and drag to select everything, and then press Command D to duplicate everything. Now my robot has two legs. For my robot's body, I'm just going to click and drag a cube, and then drag it up. And then I'm going to translate it up. Now I have quite a bit of my robot built, and I'm kind of having trouble getting a grasp on what he looks like from each of these angles since I'm moving around so much. As I showed you earlier, you can click on this compass in order to give you a head-on look with your camera. Looks like I accidentally built my robot facing to the right instead of to the front, but I'm going to go ahead and go with it for now. What you can also do is press the spacebar once. This will show you 4 different camera angles. You got your top, side, and front. So now I can edit my robot's body and it will change from every perspective at once. This can be really helpful. When you have it in this mode, you can hover over each of these other camera angles and press the spacebar to bring it up big. Now earlier, when I created this object and duplicated it, the foot was combined. But maybe I want this foot of my robot to be different from this one. What I can do is I can select the object, go to Mesh, and Separate. Now again, this is going to move your object's center point. Since this is a duplicate of this foot, it's going to move the center point to where the center of the grid would be on this object. It may not make a lot of sense, but the easy way to fix that is to select each of the objects that were part of the combined object, then go to Modify, Center Pivot. So let's say I want to get rid of this, and maybe this foot of my robot is big and bulky. So down here, I can either try to zoom in, pan around, but the shortcut to focus on a specific object is to just press the F key. That'll zoom right in. This comes in handy a lot when you're building a polygon that has lots of individual meshes. So I think that I've decided that I want to make a girl robot. That means that I want to give her a nice figure. In order to do that, I'm going to want to edit the parameters of this polygon individually. Make sure you have the object selected, right-click and hold. You'll see that you have all these different options. I want to edit the faces of this object. So when you hover over each of your object's faces, it'll turn red to show you which face you're hovering over. I want to edit this one. Now you have the same editing abilities that you had on the object as a whole. You can translate this face, you can rotate it, or you can scale it, which is what I want to do in order to give my robot a nice little hourglass figure. So once I'm done editing the individual parameters of the object, I can right-click and hold and select Object Mode, and now I can select the object as a whole again. In order to finish out the torso, I'm going to do Command D to duplicate my robot's little skirt, but instead of just moving it up, I'm going to go to Scale It. And I'm just going to scale it along the Y dimension in order to flip it around. Then I'm going to translate it up. Let's go ahead and make her torso live in order to build her shoulders. Now I'm going to make the torso not live. I want to add a little utility belt to my robot, so I'm going to duplicate this shoulder and just move it down to the waist, and then scale it accordingly. Now let's continue with the shoulders. Let's make this live and add some spheres. I'm going to change these subdivisions down to 6 again. I'm just going to delete this and work on one arm at a time so that at the end I can just duplicate it. I don't really want this part of my robot's shoulder to be so pointy, so I think what I'm going to do is select face, select each of these faces along this point, and delete them. Now I have a hole here, which I also don't want. So what I'm going to do is go into vertex mode and select each of these vertices around this hole. Then I'm going to go to Mesh, Fill Hole. And now it's filled. I'm going to go into wireframe mode so that I can do the same thing to this side, which is inside my robot's torso. Mesh, Fill Hole. I can come inside the mesh here and see that I have a nice flat surface to work with. I want the inside of my robot's shoulder to look a little bit different from the outside of my robot's shoulder. So I'm going to go back into face mode. Make sure that I'm facing the top here. Select half of the faces and edit them separately. I can also go into edge mode, double click this edge right here, and it'll select all of the edges around this part of the shoulder. So now I can move those edges without moving any of the rest of the object. Okay, I'm happy with this shoulder, so now I'm going to go back into object mode, select it, and make this live, which cancels out the fact that earlier I had this object live. Again, I'm going to go in here and change the subdivisions. Go ahead and scale it down so I can add an elbow. Go ahead and make it a little skinnier. Now I'm going to make this live. Add yet another sphere. But again, I'm going to go in here and change the parameters. Now I'm going to make this part of the arm not live. And then I'm just going to duplicate it, bring it down. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this arm. I'm going to zoom out and look at my whole robot. I realize that my arm is incredibly too small. So I'm going to go back, move this stuff out of the way, and kind of start over by scaling it up. Move this back over. When you're building something like an arm, that's one of those times when it could be really useful to have all of these windows up so that you can see how what you're building looks in proportion to the rest of your object. So now that I have a pretty decent looking arm, I'm going to go ahead, combine these four things here. Then I'm going to make a center pivot. Then I'm going to duplicate, use my scale tool to flip it around. Now I want this to be an exact mirror of what I just did, so I'm going to go over here to scale Z and make sure it's exactly -1. And now that that's the case, I'm going to come over here and move it on over. Now that I have the arms built, I think I'm going to go back into my legs scale them in a little bit so that they go a little bit better with the rest of my robot. It looks a little bit more proportional now. And then I think I might even select all this nonsense up here, scale it down. That way, and a little bit that way. Just makes everything look a little bit more proportional. But of course, it's your robot, so it's up to you. So the great thing about robots is that even though sometimes they kind of look like humans, they don't have to have all of the intricate organic details like humans. So instead of going through all the effort of building out the details of a robot hand with fingers, I'm just going to build a claw on this side. I'm going to start by taking this object and separating it. And then, while it's still selected, go ahead and center pivot. I'm going to right-click and hold and go into face mode. I'm going to select this face right here, and then I'm going to go to Edit, Mesh, Extrude. This will allow me to extrude this face, and then I can position it and scale it. Then I'm going to go into object mode, so I'm not in extrude mode anymore. Then I'm going to right click and go back into face mode, select this face, and extrude again. It's a pretty good looking claw. So I'm going to go back into face mode and start again over here. Edit Mesh, Extrude. I think that they're a little bit too small, so while I'm ahead of the game here, I'm going to go into edge mode, and I'm going to select all of those edges and all of these edges, and these, these, and those. And then I'm going to see what that does. I'm going to go ahead and move these out a little bit to give room for the other claws. I'm going to come back over here, click on this object, go back into face mode, select, and keep extruding. So that is how you use the extrude tool. Let's zoom out here, go back into object mode, and that is a sweet claw. But, you know, what kind of robot wants two claws? It's kind of boring. I think on this side, I'm going to build a gun instead. So let's go ahead, go over here, go to Mesh, Separate, Modify, Center Pivot, make sure we got all our pivots in the right place. I think for starters, I'm going to go ahead and aim it up a little bit more. I don't want to make just any old gun. I want to make a sweet bazooka. So I'm going to go ahead and make this bad boy live. I'm going to take this cylinder, I'm going to build it right here. And I'm going to drag it around once more to create the thickness. Now I want my bazooka to be very round, so I think I'm going to go ahead and keep all the details of all these subdivisions. Let's mount it right here. I'm going to go here into this pipe. So I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bit thicker at a 0.13. I want to add a lot of details to my bazooka, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to duplicate, pull this bad boy forward, and then I'm just going to go ahead and scale it down. Then I'm going to do the same thing one more time. I'm just going to add a few more details up here to the base of my gun by duplicating and then scaling this in and then out. By the way, I think if you've learned anything from this tutorial, it's that I have no idea what bazookas look like. So now I have a pretty sweet looking robot with one bazooka laser arm and one claw. Obviously, my robot is missing a head. So I'm going to come over here and go ahead and give him one. Her one. Sorry, maybe it's a unisex robot, you know? I don't judge if my male robot wants to wear skirts. Pretty standard robot neck here with a cylinder. What shape do we want for the head? I'm going to start with a cube for now. Pretty classic, but we're going to add some sweet details to our robot's head in order to give him or her a lot of character. That's obviously not what I wanted, huh? Luckily, we've mastered our scaling tools and our translating tools so that I can get what I need from that shape. Let's go ahead and make the head live so that everything we build can just build onto the head. Add one eye right there, and one eye right there. Perfect, right? Maybe 2 eyes isn't enough. Let's go ahead and give him one more eye. I'm just going to give him a small one right there. So I have 3 eyes for my robot. This is Picasso Bot. So now, I just want to create a plane for the mouth. I don't really need it to extrude out too far or anything. So he's just going to be flat on the surface of the head. Maybe I'm starting to realize my robot only needs 2 eyes. He doesn't really need this one. It doesn't really serve any purpose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this object, make it not live. Select him, and then I'm going to select this useless eye. And instead, I'm going to add some interesting details to my robot's head using Booleans. So first I'm going to go to Mesh, Booleans. Let's go with Difference. So as you can see, now my robot has an indentation where he used to have an extrusion. Booleans take the information from 2 separate objects and uses it to create one unique object using the way that the two objects interact. So for the difference Boolean, it took the first object and subtracted the second object from it to create a unique object. So now maybe our robot has 2 eyes and a nose, because everyone knows that a robot is only as good as its sense of smell. There's several different things you can do with Booleans. In addition to the difference, you can also do union, which kind of looks like it just does the same thing as combining an object. But if we go inside the robot's head, then you can see for these shapes that we haven't used the Booleans to combine, they still have all of this detail going on inside. Whereas now, since we use the union Boolean to combine these objects, the sphere and the cube have become one object with combined faces, vertices, and edges. The third type of Boolean, intersection, creates an object out of the intersection of the first 2 objects. So as you can see, Booleans can be very useful and very powerful. If you are using Booleans, keep in mind that the object that's affected is the first object selected, and the object that is affecting is the second object selected. I'm going to go ahead and keep him classic and just have 2 eyes, but since this eye is so small, I think I want to add some details to this side of his head. So what I'm going to do is zoom out here. Create a torus shape down here. I'm going to make it pretty skinny. I'm just going to pick it up and bring it over to the head. Wire's poking out or something. It's a pretty thick wire though, so let's go ahead and make it a little skinnier. And you know, instead of just having 1 wire, let's have 3. So now it looks like our robot has like a comb over or something. So now that I've got a pretty solid model built, I can see that there's still a few issues with him. For example, I added this plane to act as the mouth over here, but you can't see it. By default, when you create a mesh in Maya, it has a texture called Lambert. It's this very boring, gray, detailless texture that you never, ever, ever want to keep because it's super boring and no one likes it. So I want to add some color to my robot. I'm going to press and hold the right mouse button, and I'm going to scroll down to Assign New Material. And this menu comes up. So for my robot's mouth, I'm going to go ahead and have a Lambert texture. So you can see, I created a new texture for my robot's mouth called Lambert 2. I like to stay organized and name my textures and materials immediately. So I'm going to name this mouth. So now if I want to change the color, I come up to the attribute editor and click mouth, because that's the name of my material. And I just click on color, and I'm going to change it to black. And you can see immediately it gives me a black material for my robot's mouth. Now I kind of want to do the same thing for my robot's eyes. I'm going to select both of them, right click, assign new material. We'll go with Lambert again. I'm going to name this eyes. I'm going to come to attribute editor, go to eyes. For the color, let's change it to red. It'll be a bright red. There are things you can change besides the color. Change the incandescence, ambient color, change the transparency, and you can change the translucence. Let's go ahead and move the glow intensity up to 1. It didn't make any immediate changes, but we'll be able to see it later. For these wires, I'm going to go ahead and give them new materials as well. They're all going to be Lambert because wires are boring. But let's have one red. We'll call this red wire. We'll have this one. Be the blue wire. And then this one maybe I decide that I want the bazooka down here to be the same color as the mouth, black. It's a very threatening color. I'm going to go down here and select the bazooka. Make sure I only have the bazooka selected. I'm going to right click, assign existing material, mouth. And now my bazooka is black, just like the mouth. Maybe I decide I don't like that though, because it kind of looks like negative space there. So I'm going to select all of this again. Make sure I don't have the arm selected. And then I'm going to right click, assign new material, and this time I'm going to go with Blinn, which is a much shinier material. And now you can see my gun has a little bit of depth and shine. I can even go in here, I'm going to call this gun material. So now I've got some nice little color going on here, but let's face it, my robot's still pretty boring. What I'm going to do now is add a very basic texture to my robot. I'm going to start with the head. I'm going to right click, assign new material. Let's go with Blinn. Let's make our robot a little bit shiny. And then for color, I'm going to click right here on this little icon. And I'm going to click PSD file because I want to use an image. Image name right here, click on the folder. We're going to go to our desktop. I'm going to change this to all files because I'm not using a Photoshop file. I'm going to use this used metal JPEG file. And open. And as you can see, nothing changed. That's because we're in our material mode, keypad 5. If you go ahead and press 6, you'll see our texture. And now our robot has a little bit of texture to him. Looks like he's made of metal instead of made of Lambert. So I'm going to go in and name this texture metal. The easiest and most basic way to handle materials is to select your material and just go to Create UVs, Automatic Mapping. And it's going to do a pretty good job of lining your texture up with your object. Now this does not always work, especially if you're not only making robots, which I don't know why you'd make anything besides robots, but if you were, then automatic mapping can actually be pretty detrimental. But for the sake of this tutorial, we're not going to get too deep into textures because they can be extremely complicated and a lesson within themselves. So we're just going to go with automatic mapping. So since I like the way this looks, I'm going to go in object mode and I'm going to select all the rest of my robot. I'm going to right click and hold, assign existing material, and we'll go with our metal. Some of these places did not map as well as the others. For example, we've got this weird thing going on over here. Press F to zoom in, go Create UVs, Automatic Mapping, and it pretty much evens everything out. Do the same thing over here, select this, Create UVs, Automatic. So now we have some extremely simple textures and materials on our robot. What we want to do is render this out and see what this will look like when it's rendered. In order to render out just one frame, you can click on this little slate icon up here. It doesn't have anything on it or around it. So I'm just going to click this Render the Current Frame icon. Render View allows you to see what your project looks like when it's all rendered out. Remember earlier when we added that glow to my robot's eye? Well, now that it's rendering out, we can see what that glow actually looks like. Now, I don't really like that the huge eye is sort of taking all the glory. I'm going to close that out. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to click Eyes Material. I'm going to turn this glow intensity down to about 0.5. We'll see what that looks like. I like that better. Now, as you can see, we've got this black bazooka in here that really has absolutely no depth. It kind of just looks like a black hole in our robot's little skirt there. You know, our robot as a whole doesn't really have much depth to him, doesn't really have any context. So in order to add at least a little bit of context, we're going to add some really basic lights. I'm going to go up here to Create, Lights. And the first light I'm going to create is an ambient light. I'll just go ahead and render that out so you can see what that does. And you can see it sort of created this ambient glow down here. Now as you can see, it added our light down here, right on 0, 0, 0, and it also added this reference point over here. So as you move your light around, it will always point towards the reference point. So now I've got this nice ambient light happening all along the front of my robot. So you can come down to the attribute editor and you can see that you have some options here for editing your light. So since we think this is a little too bright, let's just go ahead and take it down a little bit. There, I like that. So now the front of our robot has a little bit of definition. But you know, now we have a whole back of our robot that's not getting any love. And our gun is still kind of just hanging out in black space. So we really need to accentuate that gun. I'm going to go create another light. Let's go with a directional light. It'll do the same thing. It'll create the light at 0, 0, 0, and then create a reference point a little farther off. So let's bring this directional light into the back, have it serve as our backlight. And as you can see, it's going to create a directional flow of light. So you can see it's lighting up the shoulders and the tops of the knees and the tops of the feet, not really so much on the back, since the light is directional. This is a really good light to use if you want to create the effect that the robot's outside and getting some sun. So you can see as we change the angle, the back of our robot gets a little bit more shine. And you know, I'm starting to think that with that backlight, we're a little bright. So I'm going to select the directional light, come over here, take the intensity on that one down as well. Sort of balances it out a little bit better. But we still got those shadows going on. So that's pretty cool. Except we still need to add some definition to this gun. So I'm going to add one more light just to accentuate the bazooka. I'm going to go Create, Lights, Point Light. So this will create light that emits specifically from this point. So I'm going to put it right by the gun here. And you can see now we have a whole lot of light on that gun. Now our gun has that nice little accent light. From every angle, we can tell that there's at least something there. That's a pretty sweet robot angle. Look at that. Our robot's ready to take over. But now that we have that point light, we can see that it's affecting the rest of our robot as well. So we're going to go back to our ambient light and take it down even more. Let's see what that does. So now we have a nice little ambient light going on, lighting up the whole robot. We've got our sweet little point light, giving our robot's guns some accentuation. And we've got our directional light serving as a backlight, giving us a few shadows. So those are the very, very basics of Maya lighting. As you can see, there are several different light types in here that you can play around with to create some pretty realistic or pretty imaginative lighting scenarios. So, as I showed you before, you click on this little icon up here to render out the current frame. If you just click on the button, you don't really have any control over how the frame renders out, where it goes, what the quality of it is, etc., etc. So, what we want to do, we're going to close this out. About 2 icons over is the render settings window icon. So we're going to click on that. And now we have all of these settings to play with. There are several options to render with. We're just going to stick with Maya software. So here you have all the output settings. Maya automatically renders frames out in this Maya IFF format, which doesn't really do you much good outside of Maya software. So I recommend clicking that and getting this drop-down menu, and you'll see a few formats that are a little bit more familiar. Since we're just rendering out one frame, I'm going to go with PNG. I'm using PNG instead of JPEG because PNG format will render out transparency and JPEG will not. So if you click render, you see There's all this black space going on back here because we don't have anything in that space. If you render out a JPEG file, it's going to look just like this with the black behind it. However, if you save it in the PNG format, all of this black renders out as transparency, which can be a lot more useful, which is why I'm going to use PNG. Down here, renderable camera. We didn't add any cameras, so perspective is fine, unless you'd rather render from exactly at the front, side, top. You remember earlier when we press the spacebar, we have all those different angles showing at once. These are those angles, so we'll just go with perspective for now. Down here, we have our image size. So this is the preset 640 by 480. You can also go down here into some video settings in case you're rendering out a sequence to add to a video. I'm just going to stick with 640 by 480 for now. And that's pretty much the basics of render settings. So we're going to close this. I'm going to pick a sweet angle. I'm going to go with this giant monster robot angle from before. And I'm going to go render. And that gives me a pretty cool looking image with some sweet lighting details thrown in there. You can go here to File, Save Image. I'm just going to save it on the desktop right now. Robot, render. And I'm going to click PNG. Save. So if we come over here to the desktop, I can see that my robot rendered out with the transparency because it's a PNG image with some lighting, shadow, etc. So there you have it. That's the basics of Maya. We created this pretty sweet, terrifying, it's actually kind of adorable, robot. Well, I hope that this was helpful, and I hope that your robot turned out as awesome as mine did.